ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूप कदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकं। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरो श्रीयुतापदकमलं श्रीगुरून् वैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातं सहगण रघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवम् साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधाकृष्णपादान् सहगणललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितां च नमो विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्ता स्वामिन् इति नामिने। नमस्ते सारस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशतारिणे। हे कृष्णा करुणा सिंधो दीनबंधो जगत्पते गोपेश गोपिका कांता राधा कांता नमोस्तुते। तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये। वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैता गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 रामो राम रामो Hare Hare. So I welcome you all. Thank you very much for joining. And again, I might have forgotten from which places you're joining from. Yeah, I remember Bikash Prabhu is from Belgaum, Joshi Prabhu is from Rajasthan, but others, Pramod Prabhu is from Belgaum. Others can just, Swami Prabhu is from Belgaum, Vikram Prabhu is from Goa. Others can just text from which place they are joining from. That will be just to get a hang of it. So you can just, from which city you're joining, you can just type in a chat box. Yes. So we were discussing that about different types of yoga system till yesterday. And today we will continue with the same discussion. So we discussed about various types of yogas, that is karma yoga, jnana yoga, then ashtanga yoga, dhyana yoga. And then now we will discuss about um, this thing, Bhakti Yoga. Oh no, some more about Ashtanga Yoga. I'll share the PowerPoint and then we can start. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you for your responses on chat box. So now I'll start sharing the PowerPoint. Yes, if you have any questions, you can type it, but don't post it immediately. Um, so that mm, I will give you a chance at the end of the session, during question and answer session, you can share your questions in the chat box. Yes. So till then, don't post anything in the chat box. It will just show some notifications which will distract me. So unless something which is very pressing, like if you're not able to um, hear me, then you can text it in the chat box because your microphones are locked. Okay. So now I'll share the PowerPoint. Okay. So more about Ashtanga. I'll be turning off my video also. That will increase the quality of my presentation. Yes. So more about Ashtanga Yoga. So we know that it's a meditative process to control the mind and senses and to ultimately focus one's concentration on the Supreme. So we have various, so this is how people who practice Ashtanga Yoga, their objective is to achieve um, realization of Paramatma, that is super soul sitting in their heart. Okay, so that's one thing. And then So it's a mechanical meditative process for controlling mind and senses, for focusing on the supreme. So there are strict rules and regulations, but there are inherent danger of falling into trap of eight siddhis I was telling you. So it's nearly impossible to perform in the age of Kali. So I'll come to the siddhis later on. So there are eight steps I told you: yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. So these are the siddhis. Again, there are eight primary type of siddhis. What you call anima, lagima, prapti, ishitva, prakamya, vashitva, kama, vasayita, etc. That is like these empower somebody to become lighter than the lightest, heavier than the heaviest, obtaining anything of one's choice, controlling others, and so on. But actually, even genuine Astanga yogis look at these siddhis with contempt as they are simply distractions on the path. So I was telling they are like byproducts. We should not get carried away. People who practice Ashtanga yogas should not get carried away by these siddhis. It's again a material mystic powers, which is not the real goal of yoga practices. The real goal of yoga practice is to achieve love of God. So once it so happened, so one journalist came to Srila Prabhupada and asked him, Prabhupada, can you show some miracles? Because usually, sadhus means everybody has an idea they may show some miracle. They just bring some ashes in their hand or do some magic or bring some gold. They just create some gold from their hands and just out of the blue like that. They would be having some siddhi. So he asked, can you show me some miracle? The journalist asked Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said, yes, of course. Can you see my disciples? And he was in America at the time. He was showing his American disciples. And he said, see, now they are leading such a pure life. And look at them. They are so clean and they are so pure, chanting the holy names and practicing bhakti. Earlier, most of them were hippies. They were left out from the mainstream society, rejected and jobless, and they were into all kind of sinful activities, illicit relationships, gambling, intoxications, meat eating, whatnot. So you mention any sinning, they would be doing that. But now look at them. They're so pure that they're not doing any kind of sins and they are experiencing love of God. And is it not a miracle? Actually, this is the highest miracle, Prabhupada said. A, a sinner getting transformed into saint is the real miracle. It's the ultimate miracle. So not just bringing out gold somewhere from the blue or some ashes or floating on water or flying in the air or getting some siddhis, becoming very heavy, all these kind of mystic or power or miracles are nothing in front of um, a sinner getting transformed into saint. So we see this. We have these records even in our Vedic scriptures. How Valmiki was once upon a time a dacoit and who became a great devotee, right? And we have Mrigahari becoming a great devotee. Like that, so many examples are there. So that is the biggest miracle actually. And Prabhupada said it is possible even in the contemporary world. It's not just mentioned in scriptures. Okay, so and he showed practically how his his disciples are leading very pure life. So another time, some journalists asked Prabhupada, like, uh, Prabhupada, do we need intoxicants to achieve God realization? Do we need to take drugs? And Prabhupada said, no. I said, and that person said, so can you give higher taste, which can take somebody higher than drugs? Prabhupada said, yes, you chant Hare Krishna Mahamantra, you will get much higher than taking drugs and you will get more happiness. You don't need to depend on some artificial chemicals to become high. So then that person said, how do you know that this um, Hare Krishna Mahamantra chanting can give you more happiness than drugs? Have you ever taken drugs? Prabhupada said, no, I never taken. Then that journalist said, how can you say that? Then if you have not personally taken any drugs, how can you compare? Then Prabhupada said, ask my disciples. So they were all hippies and they became happies. So now that's the miracle I did. I transformed hippies to happies. And they have tasted drugs before coming to Krishna consciousness, before coming to me. They had done all kind of sinful activities. So you can ask my disciples. So then his disciples gave the feedback that now they are getting higher taste. So they will never trade what they are having now with anything, something lower material. So Prabhupada was very practical in his approach, and that's something I just wanted to tell. So just not let us not get carried away by siddhis actually. So Astanga Yoga is not, I mean, practical for Kali Yuga. I'll elaborate on this point now. So devotees of the Lord who are practicing Bhakti Yoga, in particular, are not at all impressed by a display of such powers, mystic powers, because they understand that these things to be material, insignificant, and irrelevant. The substance of life is devotion to God, nothing else. So that's important. When Lord Krishna described the process of Astanga Yoga to Arjuna in chapter 6, so sixth chapter of Bhagavad Gita gives elaborate description of practicing Astanga Yoga with all its strict requirements like being celibate, freedom from ego, fear, and material desires, going to a secluded place, controlling the mind, etc. And Arjuna said it was very difficult for him to follow. This is important. After describing the whole process of Dhyana Yoga or Astanga Yoga in chapter 6, people don't see the last part of the chapter. They just overlook it. This is very, very important. So at the end of the chapter, Arjuna is telling that it is very difficult for him to follow this particular path. Then how can this process be applicable for us ordinary people of Kali Yuga? Therefore, Ashtanga Yoga is not practical for this age. Even though people do try, do practice here and there, you see in the society some yoga clubs coming up and some yoga teachers teaching this Ashtanga Yoga. Yes, they may achieve some benefits. I don't say there is zero benefit. They may achieve some good health, fit body because it would be involving asanas and pranayama. So they will be achieving it. I don't say they will not achieve anything, but they won't achieve anything beyond that. Definitely not love of God. So they will not be able to see Paramatma in their heart because it's very difficult to achieve perfection. Only up to preliminary level, some bodily postures, bodily exercises, and respiratory exercises, and that may improve their quality of life and material life or whatever health issues they may be able to overcome. So they may get attracted to these things. But what beyond that? Are they able to achieve samadhi? Are they able to see super soul in their heart? No, it's very difficult to achieve perfection, not practical in Kali Yuga. So when Arjuna said that it is difficult to practice this yoga, what to speak of we ordinary people? And Arjuna was in Dwapar Yuga and we are in Kali Yuga, much more difficult. So some Ashtanga yogis prefer to worship the impersonal Brahman, and others develop attachment for the Lord in the heart. That is Paramatma teaches. Okay. Gradually, the Astanga yogi may advance to the point of beginning to render devotional service to the Supreme Lord. He has now arrived at the platform of Bhakti Yoga. So, all these people will ultimately need the help of Bhakti Yoga process to achieve perfection. That's very, very important. So, Bhakti Yoga, what now coming to the point? Now, we discussed so many types of yogas. Now, we will discuss the last one, Bhakti Yoga. Okay, so now what is Bhakti Yoga? Bhakti Yoga is yoga of selfless, ecstatic love of Godhead by rendering devotional service. This is simple definition. And the process of Bhakti Yoga is elaborately described in chapter 12 of Bhagavad Gita. You can note down. Chapter 3 describes Karma Yoga. Chapter 6 describes Dhyana Yoga. And chapter 12 describes Bhakti Yoga. Okay. And in fact, the whole Bhagavad Gita actually is preaching Bhagavad Gita. Sorry, Bhakti Yoga is pointing towards Bhakti Yoga. Many people don't realize this, but if you carefully and meticulously study whole Bhagavad Gita, you will understand the culmination is Bhakti Yoga. Because after Karma Yoga, after Dhyana Yoga, everywhere, if you see the last few texts, you will realize that there is something higher. Okay. And when you read the entire Bhagavad Gita in the mood of devotion, spirit of devotion, when you discuss with devotees, in the association of devotees, when you study Bhagavad Gita, you will understand perfectly well that Bhakti Yoga is the topmost yoga system, which I'm going to describe slowly now. Okay. Now, it involves engaging all the senses, okay, in the service of the Supreme Lord, who is the master of the senses. It makes us transcend all material designations. It purifies the heart and senses and arouses love of God within. Okay. So, and Prahlad Maharaj has defined bhakti or devotional service to the Lord as a ninefold process. This is very, very important. One can attain perfection in Bhakti Yoga by adopting any one of these processes. So there are 9 processes. You can take the screenshot or um, of this particular slide. I'll show the text also. Okay, the text is missing. Okay, the text is missing. Okay. So the text is in Srimad Bhagavatam. You can note down, that's not there on my slide. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 5, text 23 and 24. 7.5.23, 24. There are 2 texts which are discussed together. So I'll read the text, recite the text. Shri Prahlad Uvacha Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam Padasevanam Archanam Vandanam Dasyam Sakyam Atmanivedanam Iti Pumsarpita Vishnu Bhaktis Chennavalakshana Kriyete Kriyeta Bhagavatyadha Tanmanye Aditamuttamam. The translation says that Prahlad Maharaj said, hearing and chanting about the transcendental holy name, form, qualities, paraphernalia, and pastimes of Lord Vishnu, remembering them, serving the lotus feet of the Lord, offering the Lord respectful worship with 16 types of paraphernalia, offering prayers to the Lord, becoming his servant, considering the Lord one's best friend, and surrendering everything unto him. In other words, serving him with body, mind, and words. These 9 processes are accepted as pure devotional service. One who has dedicated his life to the service of Krishna through these 9 methods should be understood to be the most learned person, for he has acquired complete knowledge. So, this is very, very important, all these 9 processes. So this is what are the tenets of Bhakti Yoga. Of course, I was telling you that when we were discussing Karma Yoga and how Karma Yoga is the components of Karma Yoga is there already in Bhakti Yoga, but still Karma Yoga falls one step below Bhakti Yoga. So Bhakti Yoga people are not just sentimentalists; they would be doing many services to the Supreme Lord, and they are detached from the fruits of their activities. And Bhakti Yoga has additional features which is not there in Karma Yoga. The defining features of Bhakti Yoga are these 9 elements. So 9 important activities. So there are some examples of great devotees from scriptural references who achieved perfection in devotion or Bhakti Yoga or devotional service. Bhakti is basically love of God. What Jesus said as love of God is nothing but bhakti. Okay, so we have scriptural references how even following or practicing one of these 9 elements can bring perfection. It's not necessary that we have to follow all 9 elements. It's okay if we follow all 9 elements, it's wonderful. But if we can't, at least few elements we can follow. If not, at least one we can follow, at least one of these elements. And amongst them, usually we will be easily able to follow few of them, not necessarily one. And one particular element, that is Shravanam or hearing, is something which we should not stop doing. It is most important. And exactly, you are already doing this. Now you are sitting and hearing from me, right? So I am just glorifying the Supreme Lord and his teachings. So you're simply sitting and hearing. And that is most potent in Bhakti Yoga. And this is benefiting you, right? Otherwise, why would you come here consistently from day 1 to day 18? I mean, no, that's giving you something, some kind of happiness. Maybe you will achieve much more, but at least you have an experience that you're getting something. So this is simply what you are doing, just hearing. That's it. So that is the very potent process of devotional service. And along with it, we can do few others of these 9. And we see that Parikshit Maharaj achieved perfection simply by hearing, and Shukdev Goswami achieved perfection simply by singing or speaking about the Lord. Even I am getting so much of benefits. I also feel happy when I speak about the glories of the Lord. Right? So Kirtanam is speaking. And when you, if you share this, if you want to, I mean, you, after hearing this, whatever you learned on everyday presentations, if you go and share with your friends or family members, you also get some happiness. And Smaranam is remembering the Lord. Prahlad Maharaj actually achieved perfection by simply remembering the Lord throughout his life. Prithu Maharaj achieved perfection by worshipping the deity of the Lord. Akrura offered prayers to the Lord and achieved perfection. Lakshmi Devi serves the Lord's lotus feet and achieves perfection. And Hanuman acts as Lord's servant, that is seventh one, Dasyam, and he achieves perfection. And Arjuna acts like a friend of Lord. Actually, in fact, he becomes friend of Lord and achieves perfection. And Bali Maharaj surrenders everything to the Lord and achieves perfection. Now, I can tell you the stories of each one of these great personalities, but it will take long time. So I think in follow-up sessions, you will get acquainted to these great devotees actually. So now I would like to, okay, before busting the myths, I wanted to tell you that a great devotee by name Ambrish Maharaj perfected his life by adopting all the 9 processes of devotional service. So Bhakti Yoga is the easiest, quickest, and most effective yoga process to achieve the perfection of life. That's very, very important. Okay. Now I would like to burst some myths. Like people say, Bhakti Yoga, for sentimentalists, for people who are not so intelligent. And Gnana Yoga is for intellectuals. No, this is wrong. This is wrong understanding. So Bhakti Yoga is topmost. It is for everybody, whether one is very intelligent or moderate or less intelligent. For everybody, Bhakti Yoga is going to empower them and helps them to achieve perfection. I was telling you how Gnana Yoga is, uh, I mean, it's not that Bhakti Yoga is not for intellectuals. Bhakti Yoga is even for intellectuals, for everyone, in fact. So, because when a person understands but that human intelligence can help us to understand God to a certain extent, but not completely, because human intelligence cannot be superior to God by definition, and anybody who understands this concept is most intelligent, and anybody who understands that we can understand God through love or bhakti, through devotion, he is the most intelligent person. He is the most intelligent person. So bhakti yogis are in that sense more intelligent than gnana yogis. So it is not for, it is not and people often say bhakti yogis are just sentimentalists. No, it is not sentimental. So are we not using our intelligence in discussing Bhagavad Gita? So other day Mataji was asking very nice question actually, that how we can use intelligence in the service of Lord. That doesn't mean that we are practicing Dana Yoga. It is still an element of Bhakti Yoga. In Bhakti Yoga, we use all our senses in the service of Lord. We use our hands to perform arti, to clean the temple. We use our eyes to see the Lord. We use our tongue to glorify the Lord and also to honor prasadam. We use our ears to hear the glories of the Lord. We use our nose to smell the, flowers that was offered to the Lord and tulsi leaves that was offered to the Lord. We touch the deity of the Lord and we touch his lotus feet. So that is how we use everything in the service. And we use our mind and intelligence also in the service of Lord. We use our mind in meditating on the Lord, trying to focus on him. And we use our intelligence also in the service of the Lord by discussing all these things like what we are doing now. In fact, Krishna tells that um, when we discuss Bhagavad Gita, we use our intelligence in the worship. We worship the Supreme Lord using our intelligence. So it is not just sentimentalism and just, people think that, okay, just people who do bhakti yoga, bhakti, who practice bhakti are not very intelligent people. This is the misunderstanding. They say that, okay, they just, you know, they just isolate themselves from the rest of the world, and then they become um, very not so, productive. So this is their misunderstanding. And they think that the people become passive, they lose their activities. No, now, for example, if to such people we can ask a question, what kind of yoga did Hanuman practice? Hanuman was doing so many activities, right? He did so many services to the Lord. He jumped across the ocean, killed so many demons, he did so many activities and he burned the whole Lanka. No, it's not an ordinary activities. Now, what kind of yoga do you think he practiced? Was it karma yoga? Was it jnana yoga? Now, anybody would agree that Hanuman practiced Bhakti Yoga. So Bhakti Yoga, yes, of course, it is. We involve so many things like chanting the holy names and singing hymns, glories, and everything. But it also has so many wonderful activities we can perform in Bhakti Yoga. It's not just restricted to singing and chanting. So we see that Hanuman did, and everybody agrees Hanuman did Bhakti Yoga. And there is a beautiful text in chapter 7, text 19, which I'll discuss later on. Okay, just hold on. It's there in next few slides. And this is another misconception, myth people have. Bhakti yogis become materially impoverished. Who now we should ask question to them that who won the battle of Kurukshetra? Ultimately, it is Arjuna, not Duryodhana. So who won? Who got the ownership or kingship of Lanka? We see Vibhishan gets. So how can you lose materially? So we have nothing to lose by practicing bhakti. In fact, we have everything to gain. Okay, we need to tell that. Okay. Now, what defines bhakti is not the activity, but the intents and motives behind it. The motive of all activities, thoughts, and words of a devotee is to please the Supreme Lord Krishna. That is called Samsiddhir Haritoshnam. So we can be doing any of this, eating prasadam or honoring prasadam, working in office or on our business field, fighting in battlefield like Arjuna did. Okay, if somebody is in army, he may be, he may be in battlefield, singing. So we singing bhajans or intellectual feats like what we are doing now, painting, you name any activity of this world can be actually done for the pleasure of the Lord. So we can engage all our talents and skills in the service of the Lord. There is no restriction. There's so much unlimited options, unlimited varieties. So what is counted is sincere endeavor and not the material outcomes. So whether we succeed in our activity or not is not a big deal. But how much sincerely we tried is very, very important. Our sincerity is the criteria. We see that little squirrel who helped in building Ram Setu attracted the mercy of Lord. So his contribution was not really significant compared to the contribution of other monkeys and Hanumans and all. But still, the squirrel gave the best of his capacity. So it is not dependent on our outcome. It depends on our sincerity and to the best and in accordance to our capacity. Okay, so that's something about bhakti, and this is what other day some participant was trying to share the information. The other processes of yoga are like, if you in when monkeys carry their babies, you see the baby has to hold very tightly to the mother, otherwise it will fall down. Similarly, if practitioners of Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, Ashtanga Yoga, if they want to achieve perfection, they have to struggle to hold on, to focus on Supreme Lord and hold on to Him, right? But Bhakti Yoga is so easy that the devotee, all that he needs to do is he has to allow God to hold us. That's it, which is more safe. Now, when we allow God to hold us, enter into our life and intervene in our lives and take control of our life, that is the most intelligence, because we may fail to hold on to God and we may drop down. But in Bhakti Yoga process, we allow God to hold us, so there's no question of falling down. So that's very, very important. That's why Bhakti Yoga is very important. And why Bhakti Yoga is topmost? It's not because I am saying that. Sometimes, people want to justify, what they are doing is right. No, that is egocentric approach. No, I'm not telling Bhakti Yoga is topmost because I am practicing it. No, 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 no. Not, no, I'm not trying to justify that way. Now it is the other way around. Because Bhakti Yoga is topmost, I am practicing it. I'll repeat if I confused you. So it's, see, I'm not telling Bhakti Yoga is the topmost just because I am practicing. Not that I am great or I am putting myself, like I'm justifying myself. No, it is the other way around. Because Bhakti Yoga is topmost, I am practicing it. Okay. Otherwise, why would I practice something which is not the best? Now, if I have to invest my time and energy, my time and energy is limited, and I want to make best use of it, I would rather invest it in something really best. So, right? So something, if you have five different kind of businesses available to you, and you have same amount of money, resources with you, and you see which gives the best outcome, and you stick to that particular business, right? You will just forget about other four businesses. You want the best one, which suits you. In fact, Bhakti Yoga suits everyone. So, but people do not have proper understanding about Bhakti Yoga. So, some people take up who have understanding. Some people who don't have proper understanding will not take up, whatever it is. So, Bhakti Yoga is the topmost. I'm not making an egocentric statement that I am great, so I practice Bhakti Yoga, so Bhakti Yoga is great. No, that is not the statement I'm making. I'm making the other way around. Because Bhakti Yoga is the topmost yoga system, I am practicing it. Otherwise, why would I practice it? If something is not the best, why should I take it? That's something I wanted to emphasize. So in continuation with the discussion, so I would like to show you a yoga ladder. Okay. Last slide. Okay. So the path leading up to God is like a ladder. You can see here, it's like a staircase. Okay, in the slide you can see. So you can save this slide, you can take a screenshot. The different yogic processes are like rungs on the ladder. Bhakti Yoga is like the topmost rung, you can see here. Oh, sorry. In fact, Bhakti Yoga is like an elevator or lift that takes us very easily and quickly to the top. Trying to reach the top through the other processes means that we have to climb the stairs all the way to the top. This is naturally very slow and cumbersome. In other words, the normal long route would be for one to evolve gradually over many lifetimes through all the six stages, that is, the kinds of human beings that we have discussed earlier, that is, lawbreakers, karma kandis, karma yogis, jnana yogis, astanga yogis, and finally, bhakti yogis. So one should save time, energy, and inconvenience and adopt the risk-free process of Bhakti Yoga immediately. The yoga ladder is shown below. So all the other processes up to step 3 actually is a cumbersome and a long process. And it requires some kind of efforts from, I mean, lot of efforts from the practitioner's side. But Bhakti Yoga it also requires efforts, but relatively much easier than other processes of bhakti yoga. And one need not, yes, one can go indirectly by going step by step, or one can directly practice bhakti yoga. It is not necessary that we should practice all these karma kanda, nishkam karma, gnana yoga, ashtanga yoga, and then come to bhakti yoga. No, right from the beginning we can take a bhakti yoga. It's like just entering an elevator. So instead of taking a staircase, physical staircase, and with great difficulty reaching the top floor of the your multi-floored building, you can simply go to the elevator, and there you need not even press the button. Somebody else will press. Okay, that's the best part of Bhakti Yoga. When you come in association with devotees, devotees are more eager to take us. So they help us. They help us and they inspire us, and we are there with them, and they just press the button and the door closes and we are taken above. All that we need to is we need to have faith in them, in the devotees of the Lord, and we need to just cooperate with them. That's it. And the ride is very smooth. So there's no much difficulty. That's very, very amazing part of Bhakti Yoga. It's very easy to perform and most efficient type of yogas. So Bhakti Yoga is independent, but all other yogas are dependent on it for achieving ultimate perfection. Okay. In other words, Bhakti Yoga is sufficient in itself to achieve perfection. We don't need anything more. But along with other processes, if somebody is practicing some other yoga practices, bhakti yoga is also required for perfection. That's why we see that sometimes people who are practicing other types of yogas also sometimes sing bhajans and then slowly try to incorporate some elements of bhakti and then try to uplift themselves. So at any stage of the yoga, okay, somebody may say that, oh, I was not having any idea about bhakti yoga. All along my life I used to practice some other yoga. So what should I do now? Doesn't matter. At any stage of the yoga practice, yoga ladder, one may take to bhakti yoga. The horizon, suppose you are practicing some other yoga, let us say Ashtanga yoga for a long time. That's fine, not a problem. So now you can switch to bhakti yoga. Okay, not a big deal. So at any point of time, we can always, like if somebody was not knowing anything about elevator, they were trying to get on the top floor using the staircase. They came to third floor, fourth floor, or something. Their goal was 10th floor. Now, even from third floor, fourth floor, anywhere in any floor, they can enter the elevator, right? It is not necessary that we have to go back to ground floor and enter the elevator. No, whichever floor you are, the elevator is accessible to us. So even if we are practicing some other yogas with because of not having information about bhakti yoga, even if we practiced other yogas for a long time, the elevator is, if we are in any floor, the elevator is always available to us. We have to just press the button, enter the elevator. Okay, so that's not a problem. So what is it that is required for one to come to bhakti yoga from any stage of the yoga ladder? That is association of devotees, which is very, very fundamental, something which cannot be done, cannot be sidelined. The most fundamental and most important aspect of practicing bhakti yoga is associating with devotees. That's very, very important. Now, I'll give you some examples from scriptures, okay, also in the contemporary world. So, like we know that Valmiki Muni was not a devotee right from birth. So, he was actually into a lot of sinning. He was a dacoit. He used to plunder people. But simply by few moments of association with Narad Muni, he transformed. Narad Muni came and all that he did was he preached a little bit and introduced Harinam. He gave the Naam of Lord Ram and he said, you keep chanting this. And you know, he became such a great sage, a saint, Valmiki, and he was empowered to compose this great literature of called Ramayana, which we all relish even today. And we see that even there is another great devotee, Mrigahari, who was actually a great sinner before coming to bhakti. So he used to half kill animals, actually, and he used to enjoy seeing them, observing them suffer, like with their in their pain. So once Narad Muni meets him and he says, "Why are you doing this, Mrigahari? At least kill them full." So and relieve them of their suffering. And this Mrigari says, no, 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 I get a pleasure when I see living entities suffer. And Narad Muni says, do you know what is the end result of this? You will have to suffer like this in future. Then Mrigari gets shocked and he says, then he, the story is long, but I will cut short. So then Narad Muni says, now you have to get rid of your karmic reactions. Otherwise you will have to suffer in future. Then Brigari says, okay, I am ready to do that. What should I do now? Like, then Narad Muni says, first break your bow. Then Brigari gets ready to break his bow. Imagine that was the only source of his income, the only source of his sustenance. And he used to do hunting and eat the meat. But now he has been called for to break his bow. He doesn't know anything else. How will we make a livelihood? But still, he had a faith in Sadhu. He had faith in Narad Muni. So he broke his bow and threw it away. Then Narad Muni says, don't worry, you will be sustained. Your bodily needs will be taken care of. And Narad Muni asked him to chant the holy names, plant a tulsi plant in his near his cottage, and worship tulsi plant and chant the holy name. And Brigari did this continuously. And all villagers who would come incidentally see him understood that there is a sadhu. And in Vedic culture, whenever they see some sadhu, they don't go empty-handed. They just offer him something. So they used to come bring grains, vegetables, fruits, and just leave it near him and go away. So he used to get so many things more than what he used to need. In fact, he used to redistribute them to people in need. So he used to get, and then he used to continue to chant, 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 chant the holy names. And then his heart melted, transformed, and he became a great devotee. And after some time, Narad Muni and Parvat Muni will be coming in the same area, and they observe this Mrigahari. And as they approach him, Mrigahari sees them coming near them, so he immediately stands up to offer respects, and he goes near them. And then he would be about to bow down and fall flat on the ground. That's how a devotee offers respects to his superiors, especially to his spiritual master and the Supreme Lord. So, about to offer obeisances, but then he will notice something. He will stop back, and then he will take a cloth, the upper cloth from his body, and then he will try to wipe the ground on which he is. He will wipe, or he will dust the ground, and then he will offer obeisances. And then Narad Muni and Parvat Muni will offer their blessings to him. And then they ask Mrugahari, nice to see you, but why did you, why were you trying to brush the ground, trying to blow the ground with the cloth? Then Mrugahari said, my dear Lord, actually, my dear Gurudev, actually, I was about to offer respects, but then I saw some ants on the ground. I didn't want to crush them with my body, so I just wanted to blow them off, and then I did it. So then Parvat Muni becomes astonished. Look at this Mrugari. At one point of a time, he was killing animals, half killing them and enjoying, observing their pain. Now look at him. He doesn't even want to kill an ant. So what a transformation. So that's what we read from the scriptures. Little bit of momentary association of a devotee transforms somebody's life. No, that I'm not telling that you are all sinners and you will become saints. No, you are already a pious people. That's why you are here. I'm not telling that. But in general, the potency of Bhakti Yoga. Now, wherever you are, but still you can go higher, further. Okay, that's not the point. I'm telling that everybody is sinner and so we have to become saints. Yes, we have to become saints, whatever it is, and not necessary that we are sinners in the current situation. We may be doing some minimal sinning, that is a different issue, but we can overcome that also and perfect our life. Okay, so I'm just telling in general, Bhakti Yoga is so potent, it can actually transform even the greatest sinner into greatest saint. So that's something I wanted to tell you. And that's why we see even other people who practiced other type of yoga, when they come in contact with devotees, somehow or the other, they become they also become they also perfect their life. Like, for example, there are references in scriptures. Like, there was a king called Prachina Barishit. He was completely immersed in karma kanda, ritualistic Vedic processes, but again, by association of Narad Muni, he becomes a great devotee of the Lord. And they were impersonalists who called Kumaras, four Kumaras. It's they mentioned in the scriptures, and they were practicing Jnana Yoga, and they somehow got access to some tulsi leaves that was offered to the Supreme Lord, and they just smelled, they just took the fragrance of these tulsi leaves. Immediately, their heart melted and developed love for the Supreme Lord, and they became devotees. And we know that there is a, personality called Durvasa Muni, and he was practicing Astanga Yoga or Dhyana Yoga. But he comes in contact with one great devotee called Ambarish Maharaj. And then the powerful mystic yogi Durvas Muni developed the understanding of greatness of devotees, actually. So this is a nice story, actually, but I wanted to tell this story, but um, today is actually 17th day, right? I have only one day. So I was thinking, can we extend for one more day, so that I can, or if I extend for one more day, it will be just for 20 or 25 minutes, not more than that. I hope it's okay. So with all of you. Yeah, so because I think I may miss some final details and I don't want you to miss this. It's nice. So maybe if if we fall short of time, the last day on 19th day, we can just discuss somewhere some 20 minutes or 25 minutes, not more than that, not entire 1 hour. So let's see how it goes. So then I can go slow, and I can touch upon the details now. So I was telling you, then I'll tell the story of Ambarish Maharaj. So it so happens that, Durvas Muni is very well known for his anger. So anytime he gets anger, and he can create havoc with that. So once there was a great king called Ambarish Maharaj. He was a great devotee of this Lord, and he used to engage all his senses in the service of Lord. Okay, and he used to practice bhakti yoga actually. And he had a beautiful temple, beautiful deities installed by devotees, and he would take care of the services of render. He would render um, services to the deities actually. And once it was an Ekadashi time, and he was observing a fast. So then it so happens that as he observes the fasting, and next day would be Dwadashi, when he's supposed to break the fast. At that point, Durvasa Muni comes as his guest. We know in Vedic tradition, um, yeah, a person's integrity is tested. Advancement, spiritual advancement is tested by how he treats unexpected guests. When guests suddenly come, when we are busy in life, and we are busy with so many things, and suddenly guests come. I mean, suddenly we will not have a pleasant feeling in our heart, right? In a conditioned state, we feel that, oh my God, I had to again another extra responsibility. I mean, that's the default feeling we get. But of course, we try to cover it up, and we try to, because it's not a civilized way of dealing. But and of course, in today's world, usually people give prayer appointments. Even in Vedic culture, not that everybody would go randomly. They would always give prayer appointment, prayer intimation that I'm coming at particular day and time. That is, scheduled guests. What do you call then? Because but unscheduled guests, unexpected guests are called atiti. Titi means date. Atiti means one who doesn't come with prior intimation, without telling you the date or time. So that is called atiti. So now how we treat them decides our level of advancement in spiritual life. That is the test of standard in as per the Vedic teachings. So naturally, Atiti is supposed to give honor as much as we give to the Supreme Lord. So Ambarish Maharaj receives him. So that was the culture. I mean, even today in India, actually, we see that. I mean, guests are honored in whatever way possible, right? So when the guests come, at least the minimal requirement, we offer them the seat to sit. We invite them inside the house. We offer them something to drink and something to eat. We tell some sweet words to make them feel comfortable. Okay, so these are some etiquettes. Okay, so what happens? Ambarish Maharaj will receive this guest, and then that is Durvas Muni. And it is an etiquette that before you feed the guest, we are not supposed to take honor prasadam. So before the guest takes something, we cannot eat something when a guest is in our house. So Ambarish Maharaj invites the Durvas Muni, and he says that I have finished my Ekadashi fasting. Now I am supposed to break my fast. Come, we'll honor prasadam together. And Durvas Muni says, no, 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 no. Actually, I have to take bath, so I will go and purify myself, and then we can honor prasadam. I'll just go and go to the river and take a dip and come back. So then Ambarish Maharaj says, okay, you can do that, and he sends Durvas Muni. And Durvas Muni first purposefully he delays coming back. And after the completion of Ekadashi fasting, we have to break the fast at a particular time slot. This is called Parana time. That is decided in based on certain parameters. So, so on that particular time slot, we are supposed to take some grains and break the fast. So here it so happens the time is, I mean, will be getting exhausted, and if he doesn't break the fast in that particular time slot, whatever fasting and austerities he performed on Ekadashi day will be going waste, will go waste. So it will not yield any desired outcomes. So now Ambarish Maharaj will be in a dilemma. Now he is losing time, and the Parana time ends up, and then his Ekadashi austerity will be wasted. And if he eats before Durvasmuni comes, his etiquette as a host will be broken, and he has to first feed the guest, and then he can take. So now he will be in dilemma. Now he consults the Brahmanas and his ministers, and the Brahmanas gives a solution that it's okay. What you can do is you can take few sips of water that has been offered to the Supreme Lord. That is called Mahapani. So in that sense, you're just taking few drops of water, putting few drops of water, and that sense, it is like, it's kind of alternate. You have also broken the fast. At the same time, you have not broken the fast, so you will not get into any problem. So in you will your Ekadashi fasting will be successful because you broke the fast exactly in that time slot, Parana time, by taking sips of water that was offered to the Supreme Lord, Tulsi water. At the same time, you have not dishonored your guest because you didn't eat anything. You just took few sips of water. So Ambarish Maharaj follows their instruction and does so. But then it so happens that Durvas Muni comes, and because he's a mystic yogi, because he was practicing Astanga yoga for a long time, and he has many siddhis, so he will understand what's going on in different parts of the world. So he will understand that Maharaj has already broken his fasting by taking few sips of water. So he becomes angry. How can you do this when you have me as a guest in your house? How can you take anything without giving me anything before you honor the guest? So Amrish Maharaj becomes so angry that he actually takes a hair from his body and chants some mantra, and the hair becomes a demon, a kind of rakshasa. So that demon will try to he actually does so to attack Ambarish Maharaj. So, I must have forgotten some final details of the story. Anyway, I'm just paraphrasing and giving the story. So, giving you the broad outline. So, this demon comes to attack Ambarish Maharaj. At that point of time, Lord Krishna will, he is so dear. I mean, his devotees are so dear to him. He will understand this, and immediately he will release Sudarshan Chakra, and that Sudarshan Chakra will destroy the demon who was about to destroy Ambarish Maharaj. And that Sudarshan Chakra will now start approaching Durvas Muni. And Durvas Muni will now understand, oh my God, I offended a devotee of Krishna. That is why I am in trouble now. So now Sudarshan Chakra is going to destroy me. So, Durvas Muni will start running to save himself, and Sudarshan Chakra will continue to chase him. And then, because Durvas Muni is a mystic yogi, he will have many siddhis. He can go to any planetary system, higher planetary and lower planetary system, and even um, uh, beyond the planetary system. So he goes. Even he will be having siddhis to even visit a spiritual planet. So this Sudarshan Chakra will be chasing him, and he runs. He goes to Kailash, and Lord Shiva says, "Oh, I am helpless. I cannot do anything for you. Sudarshan Chakra is more powerful than my powers. So you have to seek help with somebody else." He goes to Brahma Lok, no help. Brahma also says the same thing. He says you have to go to Vaikuntha and seek help of Lord Narayan only, Lord Vishnu only. So he goes to Lord Vishnu, and Lord Vishnu says, even I am helpless. I have already released my Sudarshan Chakra. Now I can't do anything. Then Durvas Muni says, please save me. There will be some way out. So then Lord Vishnu says that you only my devotee Ambarish Maharaj can save you. Go back to him. So then he realizes his mistake. Durvas Muni goes back to Ambarish Maharaj. So he goes back where exactly he started begin his journey. So he goes back to Ambarish Maharaj, falls at his feet. And then Ambarish Maharaj immediately offers prayers, and he first lifts Durvas Muni. He says, no, 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 no. it is not appropriate. A great personality like you, a great saint, sage, a mystic yogi like you should not be falling at my feet. I am such an insignificant. So see, devotees are so humble. So he just steps back and he lifts Durvas Muni and hugs him. And then and Durvas Muni says, "It's only you who can save me. I'm running around and throughout the 14 planetary systems, and also I approached Lord Vishnu and he said, only you can help me." So then he actually tells, please. Then Ambarish Maharaj immediately takes compassion on Durvas Muni and he offers praise to the Sudarshan Chakra, and he offers prayers to Sudarshan Chakra and appeals him to please spare Durvas Muni. And at that time, Sudarshan Chakra goes back. And Devrasamuni then understands that the position of devotees are exalted. It is much, much superior. So even though he had so many mystic siddhis and he was a perfect Astanga yogi, but in front of Ambarish Maharaj didn't had any of these siddhis. He was a simple devotee who was simply worshipping and trying to please the Supreme Lord all along his time. So he understands the position of devotees actually. So that's a very nice story from scriptures. Um, and we see that Bhakti Yoga yields maximum results in minimum time. As I told you, it's like using elevator. And one does not need to have any previous qualifications. So to practice karma yoga, Ashtanga yoga, there will be some prerequisites. But Bhakti yoga will qualify us. Bhakti yoga is so potent that even if we don't have any qualifications, Bhakti yoga will make us qualify. It provides us qualifications. So even without any prior qualification, we can take up the process of Bhakti yoga. That means nobody is actually deprived of this opportunity of taking Bhakti yoga. And Bhakti Yoga is the topmost, Bhakti Yogi is the topmost yogi. As I told you, it's not just because I am saying, there are references in scriptures also. And we see the examples in the pastime of these devotees, both in the scriptures as well as in the contemporary world. And we see that there's a beautiful text in Bhagavad Gita, you can note down 6.47, where it is said, Yoginam api sarvesham adgatena antaratmana shraddhavan bhajate yo mam same yukta tamo mataha. And of all yogis, the one with great faith who always abides in me, thinks of me within himself, and renders transcendental loving service to me. He is the most intimately united with me in yoga and is the highest of all. That is my opinion. That's what Krishna tells. Of course, opinions of ordinary people of this world has no significance. It may be true or it may not be true. But when Krishna says it is my opinion, Krishna's opinions are absolute. It's not like ordinary people's opinions. So we need to understand Krishna's position to understand the importance of this particular information. So Krishna declares that Bhakti Yoga is topmost yoga. And Krishna tells that actually one comes to bhakti only after cultivating many lifetimes of knowledge. He says, in other words, bhakti is the culmination and very purpose of acquiring gnana. So bahunam janmanam ante gnanavan mam prapadyate vasudevam sarvamiti sa mahatma sa durlabha. So actually that's chapter 7 of Bhagavad Gita, text 19. It's not there on my slide. You can write down. 7.19, where Krishna says, after many births and deaths, he who is actually in knowledge surrenders unto me, knowing me to be the cause of all causes, and all that is. Such a great soul is very rare. Okay, so that's very, very important. Furthermore, one who has taken to devotional service must be understood to have already performed all other processes of yogas in previous life. So sometimes, suddenly some least expected person will become a devotee. When we go for preaching, this happens. Sometimes we see pious people and we think that probably these people will take up bhakti, but they struggle to take it. But sometimes we see that we hardly expected somebody and they quickly progress. They take up bhakti very soon and they progress very fast. And that's because they must have practiced. The reason or explanation given is that they must have practiced other form process, other different types of yogas in their previous life, or maybe bhakti they must have practiced in previous life, but they could not perfect it. They did it halfway through. So in current life, they will just get connected with minimal effort. So therefore, only the most intelligent persons take to the devotional service of the Lord. That's very, very important. I have few more information about Bhakti Yoga, that it can be practiced by anybody. So even a child in the womb of the mother, or a small child, or an old person, anybody can practice Bhakti. What it involves, just hearing. When mother hears, comes and sits and hears the glories of the Lord, the child also gets the benefit. And when mother honors prasadam, that goes and reaches the baby. And small babies can also practice bhakti. They need not go to forest or Himalayas, sit under deep meditation. No, they can keep playing, and the same time they can honor prasadam. Who can not honor prasadam? You just give them nice prasadam, so that nourishes their body and soul. Even animals can practice bhakti in that sense. You just give a piece of prasadam to even a dog or cat on the street, they get elevated, they get benefited actually. So bhakti yoga can be practiced by anybody. So children can sing and dance, sometimes, they participate in kirtans. And if you visit, I don't know, some of you must have already visited ISKCON temples, and sometimes, there will be kirtan going on. All these kids will be jumping and dancing, full of energy. It's like the Supreme Lord's party. You don't need any dancing party for this. So children are so full of energy, and they will dance and sing and achieve perfection. They don't need to go to forest or Himalayas and go into, not a I mean, it's not a easy thing to do for adults, what to speak of kids. But bhakti yoga is anybody can do, even kid can do. And old person already debilitated, very, and already deceased, I mean, even somebody is on deathbed, can achieve perfection. His friends can help him. They can sing bhajans and glories and harinam. They can do sitting next to the bed of the patient, and they can actually get benefit simply by hearing the kirtan. And also people can read Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavatam, for people who are on their deathbeds also. So, it can be practiced in any stages of life. So there is no prior qualifications. Very simple, most efficient. So that's something I wanted to tell you. So, and it frees, Bhakti Yoga frees us completely from sins. As I told you, we get higher taste, the lower taste goes off. So if you come to the community of devotees and you make friends of them, you will learn very interesting stories when you talk one to one to devotees. This is my favorite questions. Whenever I get introduced to new devotee or new friend, new devotee in any place, I when I'm talking one to one, one question I will always like to ask, like, how did you come to bhakti? And what was your life before bhakti and after coming to bhakti yoga process? And I get very interesting answers actually. They tell amazing things, how they were sinful before and how they could give up their bad habits and became lead very pure life and so many things. Okay, sorry, I crossed 4 extra minutes. So it's 34, 7:34. I'll stop here, and tomorrow we'll continue with the discussion. So that's the essence of Bhagavad Gita, is Bhakti Yoga. And tomorrow I'll introduce Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So please, if I forget also, please remind me. Okay, thank you very much. Hare Krishna. So I'll stop